think we should start.
Right. I'm Marilyn Daniels, and my daughter Patti is the presenter this afternoon. I just read her bio in the branch buzz, but I thought I'd tell you just a touch about her. She is my very adventurous daughter. I'm not exactly where she came from because she's not like her mother at all. But she grew up in East County and went to Valhalla High School, as did her sister, and both girls wanted to go to Valhalla, even though we lived in the Monte Vista area. So to do that, they had to take Russian. And her sister lasted 2 years, and she was done. We listened to 2 years of complaints. And then when she graduated, along came Patti, and Patti did the same. She also took Russian so she could be with her friends at Valhalla. Patti did well, and she lasted for about 3.5 years, and then she was done. So fast forward, she went off to college, and she chose a small liberal arts college, Bates, in Maine. She had to take a language. So she gets there, and she's kind of looking around at what she should take, and they offered Russian. So she went to the Russian department. I may have this a little bit wrong, but basically it's the same. And she convinced them that she should start over with Russian 101, even though she had got it. She liked it, and she liked the prof, and she liked the department. I think maybe toward the end of her freshman year, she calls her father and she says, "I'm changing my major to Russian." And we just went, "You've got to be kidding." So that was where Russian began. All those little decisions you make as a teenager sometimes affect the rest of your life. And so she graduated from Bates, and then her first job, and she spent a year in Russia as an exchange student. And then I think it was her junior year. And her first job was working in Vermont for a nonprofit, and she supervised American and Russian teenagers going back and forth between the countries. And she did that, and she always loved KPBS locally and public radio. She was a good writer. So she ended up volunteering at the public radio station in Vermont, and eventually went to work with them and became a journalist. And after quitting her job after a number of years, she traveled the world, and then she went back and you knew her, Jane. Anyway, that's Patti's story, sort of, in a nutshell. And I will say one thing.
I don't know if I got a little TV. Stay on.
So, I was the last to know. She told everybody but her mother. And she told her boss that she wasn't worried about the trip, but what she was worried about was what she was going to do with her cat and what her mother was going to say. And she said, I was remarkably calm. I was calm until she was there. And then when she was there, it was pretty much a mess. But anyway, all worked out well. And I am very happy to present my daughter, Patti Daniels.
We're on here.
Thank you, Mom. I know we have a few people who've just joined. Is there a way that we could mute the participants of the meeting? I know I'm getting a little bit of feedback on my end that's a little bit distracting. I'm not sure if other people are hearing that too.
Sue Holtz, would you mute yourself? We can hear you. And it's causing feedback. For some reason, I can't mute her. So I tried.
I'd like to
Indomitable.
Patti, I'd like to introduce a guest. My neighbor, Vera Scott, is on the board of House of Ukraine in Balboa Park and has been on the news and is very active in raising funds and supplies to help the people of Ukraine. Vera, would you raise your hand or wave at us? Thanks, sweetie.
I heard a rumor you'd be with us. I'm thrilled to hear that. I hope that I hope that what I have to say matches up to your experience. But I'd love to hear your comments and questions, especially. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for being interested in my reporting experience in Ukraine. I want to just preface this by saying that the public radio show that I work on requires me to be a generalist, but my own personal interest and background, as my mom explained, is definitely in Russia more than anything else, but all the areas that Russia has a strong sphere of influence in. And so it's been very satisfying and very sad for me in the last year, especially, to be working on our coverage for this war. I've prepared some slides that I'd like to show as we're kind of talking through some of the things that we saw and we reported on. And I'm happy to stop wherever you have questions, and we can just shut all the slides down at the end, and we can just open it up to all kinds of questions on any topic you have. But I do want to let me go ahead and share my screen with you. I was in Ukraine just for about 10 days only, which is pretty short reporting trip, really. Let me open up this slideshow. Starting from the beginning. Okay, are you able to see that screen pretty well then? Great. Okay. So we were in Ukraine for, I was with two colleagues. We had kind of overlapping reporting trips, and we were there for about 10 days. And we were there for the occasion of the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion a year ago. And before we get to that, I just wanted to share a couple of maps to explain some terminology. You may have heard in news reporting people refer to the anniversary of the war. That's a phrase that a lot of Ukrainians really chafe at. And from their perspective, this war did not start a year ago. It started long before that. And to explain that, I wanted to show you this map here, which is what Ukraine looked like before the February 24th invasion. And you see these areas that are in red, and they represent the Crimean Peninsula, the Donbass in the east, and then these border regions with Moldova, Transnistria. These are all areas that Russia already occupied before last February. And that occupation began really in 2014. And so Ukrainians are very quick to say, this wasn't the anniversary of the war. This was the anniversary of the full-scale invasion. That's kind of the phrase that gets used the most. And when you think about the movement of troops and people over the course of the last year, the initial invasion was, there were aerial bombardments of cities all across Ukraine on those first days. There were, you can see in the map on the left, a lot of territory was invaded with ground troops. The initial push, you'll probably remember, was going straight for the capital, Kyiv, coming from Belarus in the north, going straight south to Kyiv with the intention of, overthrowing the government, taking control of the country. I put in this map of what the Kyiv region itself looked like, because I think that it's helpful to understand how close Russian forces got to downtown Kyiv. This area in gray represents the occupied area, formerly occupied area by Russian troops. And here's downtown Kyiv right here. And so you will have heard, I'm sure, in the last year about the town of Bucha.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
significant atrocities and war crimes are accused, and there are
Um,
thousands of
it
documented
was-
cases.
Okay, thank you. Is this April?
I think
Oh,
I'm a
thank you so much for
co-presenter.
calling. I do feel better informed. I don't know what
Is there
date
another
he's coming
voice?
home, when I will hear from the equipment people.
I think we have another voice in the Zoom call.
They mentioned a bed.
Nancy, please mute yourself. Everybody's listening
I'm
to your
so sorry.
conversation.
Okay. And so I put this map in here because I just think it's helpful to understand like really how close Russian forces came to invading Kyiv. It's, you know, from this line of occupation into downtown Kyiv is about 18 miles. So it was really quite close, and you would have heard about the town of Bucha in the news for the atrocities and war crimes that were uncovered there after the occupation. And this is where Bucha is right here, right at the edge of that occupation area. And, you know, and here I will also say I visited Bucha, and, you know, we can, when we're watching events unfold from so far away, we can kind of desensitize ourselves to the idea of who the people are who might be in those circumstances. You know, and even when we're feeling very empathetic about it, it's kind of like, oh God, those, you know, terrible downtrodden people, this thing has happened to them. And I think it might surprise a lot of people. I know it surprised me to walk through Bucha and realize it's a really prosperous bedroom community. It's, you know, it's where, like, if, you know, upper middle class commuters would live if they, you know, came into Kyiv for their jobs in investment banking or whatever. And so it just kind of like puts a whole new light on some of the news that we've been hearing about and covering from afar. And so you can see that forces came very close to Kyiv just in those first 2 months of the war, and Ukrainian forces were able to repel them and push them back. And essentially what happened was the Russian forces then regrouped in the east. They kind of were forced out of the north, forced away from Kyiv. And then they repositioned themselves into a much stronger area in the east and the south. And that leaves us to where we are today. This map was from this morning. And so you can see this area that was originally occupied before the invasion last year. All of this territory that has come under Russian occupation. These areas in yellow were formerly occupied by Russia, but Ukraine has reclaimed them. And then you can see this like darker angry red line right through here. When you are reading news reports about the most intense fighting that's going on in Ukraine right now, this is where it is happening, is right along this line of contact. This is Bakhmut and Donetsk and Soledar. It's like really, really terrible situations that are unfolding in those towns. This is the reporting team I was with. My colleague Daniel and Carolyn and we are in downtown Kyiv here. I mentioned that we were there for about a week. Daniel is actually, Daniel has been going in and out of Ukraine pretty frequently for the last year. He usually goes for 2 weeks at a time. And you know, my mom mentioned that I was really nervous about telling her that I was going. The reason I felt comfortable going and that we as a team felt confident going was, first of all, we had, you know, prepared extensively for the reporting trip. But also our newsroom, and really every good newsroom, takes really serious care for the safety of their reporters and of their teams. And there's a really strong sense of the duty of care that we have for the people that we put in the field. We do extensive contracting with security services who know the ground situation in Ukraine really well. And they advise us on what is safe, what is not safe, what the risk assessment would be for any number of circumstances. And so as we, over like the months and weeks that we prepared for this trip, we would give them reporting scenarios of places we wanted to go to, people we wanted to meet with, and they would give us a risk assessment of, you know, these are the things that you need to keep in mind if you go forward with that plan. And so it helped us kind of constantly reshape how much risk we were willing to take on, what we would be able to do, what we would not be able to do when we were there. For our purpose, because we were really wanting to understand what the last year of war had been like for civilians, especially for the people who had lived through it, we did not need to go to like the dangerous frontline cities to report that story. And so we were in what I consider to be very safe areas, and the security professionals will tell you there's no such thing as a safe area, there's risk everywhere, and that is true. Every location in the entire country of Ukraine can be hit by a missile. There's no city that is outside of missile range, and that's the kind of capricious situation that all Ukrainians live in. But artillery range is a much different story. That is active fighting, and that you can definitely measure and stay away from, which is what we did in our reporting trip. So I say that first of all, because I think it's interesting to know what kind of security measures journalists take. And also because, you know, the stories that I have to share are really stories that are told about people who are in areas that are now very safe. And I just think that's important, you know, situational awareness for you to have as you're hearing some of the things that I learned from them. In the capital, Kyiv, there is a lot of normalcy. You know, you can get really, really good cappuccino and really good sushi, and you can go to a bar and get a cocktail and get on the metro and go to work and walk around town and do almost anything that you would normally do. And the exceptions to that are that there are visible signs of war around you. You see lots and lots of people in military fatigues all over the place. In these pictures, you can see that a lot of care has been taken to cover up statues, and stained glass on churches and important monuments have been sandbagged. And all of that is to protect from either direct bombardment, but more likely the falling debris from either drone strikes or, you know, if a nearby building is hit. It's to protect all of those important monuments from damage as much as possible. So that's kind of some of the visible thing that you see around town for sure. You see a lot of people doing like kind of donation drives, you know, selling Ukrainian flags to raise funds for all kinds of different causes. And in this picture in the center top, you can see burned up Russian tanks that are on display in downtown Kyiv as kind of war trophies. And then on the upper left is probably like one of the most, you know, important historical statues in historic like ancient Kyiv, and it's completely covered up with sandbags. It's like totally unrecognizable. I kind of imagine, you know, whenever this war ends years from now, they're going to have to unpeel those sandbags, and I can't even imagine how long that's going to take or what that's going to look like. The other thing, actually, I'll just go back one second. Sorry, now I'm getting all over the place. Here's my PowerPoint skills are slowing down. The other thing I'll just mention about what is normal and not normal in Kyiv is that Ukraine is under martial law. It is a country at war, and every city has a curfew. And so in Kyiv, like you can go out to great restaurants every night of the week. But around 9 o'clock, all the servers are going to start hustling you to finish up and pay your bill because they have to get home before curfew. And so everything just kind of shuts down. And we did have like military passes that allowed us to be out after curfew. And it was absolutely silent and empty. The streets were completely empty of any traffic, anything. The curfew is really seriously abided by. The other thing that happens in Kyiv and in other places is that There are air raid sirens pretty regularly, at least once or twice a day, and no one pays any attention to them. And so you'll hear the siren go off in town. And then most people also, they have apps on their phones that it's like an air raid app, and it'll go off on your phone, and there's a voice that comes out of your phone that says, air raid alert, seek shelter immediately. Your overconfidence is your greatest weakness. And it is blasting the air raid sound out of your phone. And everyone basically just ignores it and goes on about their day. And so all over town, you see signs for air raid shelters. Everywhere there's air raid shelters, and there's apps that'll show you where's the nearest air raid shelter. And at the beginning, everyone followed all of those signals faithfully. Just absolutely every time there was an air raid alert, everyone went straight to the basements. And over time, especially I will say in Kyiv, as the threat moved away from Kyiv, people got more comfortable with the idea of maybe just ignoring the air raid siren, or maybe just going into an interior hallway to be away from windows instead of going all the way down to the basement. And then gradually over the last year, people have really stopped paying attention to them at all. And so it's a struggle for the government because they want people to pay attention, and also the threshold sometimes for sending off an air raid alert is a little bit low. And so you have situations in which there could be Russian jets that have taken off from Belarus heading towards Ukraine, and the Ukrainian military detects this and they send out an air raid alert, but it goes out to the entire country because they don't know what direction those jets are going to be flying in. And so it's a little bit like saying to every single person in California, there's going to be an earthquake somewhere in the state. We don't know when or where or how serious it's going to be. Everyone take shelter for the next 2 hours. And people are just no, I'm done with that. I'm not doing that anymore. I've got to live my life. Which I think is, it's an interesting kind of trade-off. It's both kind of alarming and also understandable. And so let's go outside of Kyiv. Like I said, Kyiv was never occupied. It was spared from actually having Russian troops in the city. But really not too far away, there is very visible destruction, evidence of destruction from Russian occupation. We went directly north from Kyiv towards the Belarus border and did a series of stories in the villages and towns that were the very first to be occupied a year ago. And so in this village, this is a tiny, tiny village, the tiniest of villages. It's called Lukashivka. And this church was once a really, really beautiful, beautiful little church. It was, it's there's a plaque on the door that says it's an architectural monument that should be preserved for posterity, which is ironic and sad to look at the church now. But this this village was occupied by Russian soldiers. In the early days of the occupation, actually, a lot of people in the church, because it's a village and people live in their own kind of very small freestanding houses, most of them did not have basements. And so a lot of them went to the church to take shelter. When Russian troops entered the village, they kicked everyone out of the church and took it over as an ammunition supply depot. And they also occupied a lot of the houses in the town. And so this church was occupied by Russian soldiers. And in Ukraine's fight to repel the Russian forces, the Ukrainian military bombed the church to get the Russians out. And so, the church really just got battered back and forth between both sides, and this is the condition it's in now. There is a desire to rebuild it. It's hard to imagine how and when that might actually happen. And so this is the road right next to the church. And going along that road, there's just like small little houses. This is one of the women we met in this town. We actually went with her to her house. She and her husband and her teenage son had their house has like 4 rooms in it. And so it was large enough that Russian forces basically occupied their house, and they had 11 Russian soldiers sleeping like in their beds, on their couches, on the floor, while they were also still living at home. And so they were also sleeping on the floor next to some of the Russian soldiers. She has a very salty sense of humor, and was just kind of telling us that she very much wants to leave her village. And part of the reason is that because they had Russian soldiers staying in their house, some of her neighbors suspect that they are somehow like collaborators, or that they were somehow benefiting from having Russian forces there, which she is appalled by, because they wanted nothing more than to get these Russian soldiers out of their house. But it's that kind of sort of insidious thing that can happen in a small town, and is probably happening all up and down the front lines, where you just have, these really chaotic situations. People don't have reliable information. They don't know who has accurate information. They don't know who to trust. Everyone is trying to just survive in the situation they're in. And then afterwards, once the Russian forces left, they were all trying to piece together the information they had. And there's a lot of mistrust that is still lingering around that town. The picture on the left is, this is what really every house on that street looks like right now. It was just, destroyed building after destroyed building. And on the fence, there's metal fences around all of these yards, because for sure most of these families would have had like, chickens and maybe a goat, like some small animals. And so written on that fence is the word children. And on some of the other fences, we saw peaceful people, or just the word people, painted or like handwritten on all the fences. And some of the other residents of this village told us that when the Russian soldiers were there, they would often just like walk up and down the street, and they would just kind of be firing their weapons indiscriminately around them. And so just in an effort to try to get them not to do that, they just started writing the words children and people on all the buildings. Which, is something that we've seen in lots of other places, that, not to much effect. The village of Lukashikva it's a tiny little town outside the capital of this province or this state. The capital city is called Chernihiv, and Chernihiv itself was under siege, but they managed to save Chernihiv from being occupied. It was pretty damaged. There's a lot of aerial bombardment of Chernihiv, but the areas surrounding the city, were destroyed in the same way that Lukashikva were. Lukashikva is a great example of what happened everywhere around the capital in order to save the capital. And I put together these 3 images to show you just an example of one building. The image on the left is from Google Street View. So it's what this apartment building would have looked like a couple of years ago when it was new. In March, it was struck in an aerial bombardment. This picture is from March. And the picture, apologies. The picture over here on the right is the picture we took last month of what it looks like now. And now you can see that there's a crane here, and some of the repair has already begun. And this is something that we were really impressed by in several areas, is how much effort is already going into rebuilding things. There are some you know, we heard stories of, you know, there's like one soldier that we talked to who lives in Kyiv, and he, I have a picture of him later in this slideshow, but he was saying that he was on the front lines for like 6 months. And when he came back, he was shocked at how everything had been cleaned up while he was away. Like when he left, there was, you know, you could see like pockmark damage and like bombardment damage all over his neighborhood. And when he came back, all of it was fixed. All of it looked like it was brand new. And you see that in a lot of areas that are away from the front line, that there's a real priority on getting things fixed as fast as possible. There is also going to be, I will just put my news hat on again for a moment, a huge opportunity for malfeasance and corruption, and huge opportunities to squander massive amounts of money, because the need for rebuilding is so massive in so many areas. And you know, with good intentions, there are a lot of organizations just plowing so much cash into this effort, and it's hard to really understand how it's being organized or tracked right now. This is also in the city of Chernihiv. When we were there, we had arranged to meet the priest of this Orthodox church. This is a Ukrainian Orthodox church, and he. We had wanted to talk to him because we were interested in the experience of people in Chernihiv and how they, you know, lived through being under siege, and then how they've kind of come to terms with rebuilding the damage in their city and moving on since then, while watching other areas become occupied and kind of go through what they experienced in the first days of the war. And he told us that he is counseling people that they need to find forgiveness, and that no one is ready to hear that message. And we were interviewing him in this church, and he had told us, you know, you can come and see me in the morning, but I have to preside over a funeral. And so we set a time with him, and we were talking to him at length. And then at one point he says, okay, well, you know, the funeral's going to start right now. So he just like stood up and like walked with us back into the main hall of the church. And all these mourners were coming in, many of them in, you know, fatigues, all of them in winter coats, obviously. And it was a soldier from this city that had been killed in the front, 500 miles away, fighting in a different town. And it was a funeral for that soldier. And so we were kind of just, you know, caught in that moment of watching the reality of this war is that hundreds of thousands of soldiers have died on both sides. It's actually uncountable how many soldiers have died on both sides. And you know, we were caught up with one family who was going through their own, you know, specific experience of what that actually means, which is pretty difficult. There are also happy stories. Like I said, we were trying to capture the kind of the completeness of what it is like to live in a country at war. And, you know, Ukrainians have an amazing sense of humor. It's a little bit of a dark sense of humor in a lot of ways, but there is a huge amount of just astonishing resilience and defiance and humor. And so I'll just tell you about a few of the people that we met. This is the soldier I mentioned who lives in Kyiv and who had, you know, been deployed and come back. When we met him, he was actually just on a break. And so he may already be actually headed back to the front lines at this point, but he came back into town, was able to hang out with his family, see his friends, get a haircut, literally in this picture, get a haircut. And, you know, we interviewed his dad, and this is a family that is like 4 generations of, you know, military service. And his dad told us that he's you know, he hears his son commenting on things that he wouldn't have noticed before, like even on a kind of crummy, you know, gray winter day. Is like, God, look how beautiful that is. The, you know, just like finding interesting things outside that he thinks are beautiful when you might normally look out the window and be like, wow, it's a really cruddy day outside. And that he's noticed his son is doing that a lot more than he would have before, and which he attributed to just the experiences of the last year. This couple, this is Alina and Stas. One of the stories that we wanted to report was just, you know, what is it like to try to date when your country's at war? Like, are people still just like trying to meet each other and go out? And Alina and Stas actually met and moved in together during the last like 6 months. And they were just absolutely the most delightful couple, and their dog is an absolute champion. He is a volunteer, so he's not in the regular army, but he is kind of doing military service. And it was just really interesting listening to them talk about how the war definitely shaped their relationship for sure. Like they would not be in the situation they're in if it were not for the war. But they also were just really lovely, and you can see like full of laughter. And then this other picture this is Maya and her daughter Sasha. Maya, we connected with a year ago as the invasion was starting. She actually kept an audio diary for our radio program, and it lasted for 2 or 3 weeks. During which her daughter Sasha was in the last weeks of her pregnancy. And so as, you know, Russian forces were moving closer and closer to Kyiv where they live, you know, Maya was trying to convince Sasha and her husband to leave the city, and they were like, there's no way we're leaving, we're not doing that. And Maya basically kept an audio diary for us of what those weeks were like, as you know, they were trying to like find a comfortable place for Sasha to, you know, be during the air raids. Like they couldn't get all the way down to the basement because they live on the 7th floor. It was too hard for her to go up and down 7 flights of stairs. And so they would like create this sort of like bomb shelter in their corridor, like in the most kind of like internal part of their apartment. And then the city went under curfew right when she was about to give birth. And so she ended up at the hospital by herself. And anyway, a year later, I got to meet Sasha and I got to meet Maya in person. And Sasha is just absolutely the loveliest, happiest person. And you know, and so we were kind of like recounting, like, these are all the stories that your mom told us a year ago. And she's like, oh, my mom worries so much. Like, she just worries all the time. Like, she wanted me to leave Kyiv, but I wasn't going to leave Kyiv. There's no way I was going to leave Kyiv. She's like, everyone was leaving. And if we left too, we'd just get caught in a traffic jam. And then what would happen? I'd give birth on the highway. Like, I wasn't going to leave this city. And so her whole version of her story was delightful to hear. And I talked to her for a while about what it's like to raise a baby as this war is going on. You know, and she is fully optimistic, like a lot of Ukrainians are, that a lot of people that I met who feel that they are absolutely resolute and certain that they are going to win, maybe even this year. And their defiance is remarkable. The kind of the unanimity of how defiant they are is, it was really kind of surprising. We really worked hard and sought out people who would normally be, you know, political rivals of Zelensky, to ask them, like, this president has an astronomically high approval rating. You know, he had a pretty middling approval rating before the invasion. And now he's like, you know, 85-90% of Ukrainians approve of his job. Right. And that seems like unrealistic that could be sustained. And even his political rivals are like, this is not the time. This is not the time for political arguments. It's like, I've got plenty of problems with him. All of it can wait till later. Right now, he's our president. We're behind him. We're at war. We're going to win. Which made an impression on me. I mean, I thought that was really interesting and surprising. Those were some of the things I wanted to make sure I had a chance to tell you. There's a million other things I could tell you, but I think maybe the best use of our time would probably be your questions. What do you think?
Tina, this is Jane. I'm calling, Patty, I'm sorry. I get the two of you mixed up. You're so much alike. Where did you stay when you were there?
We stayed in a hotel. Yeah, and you know, I mentioned the security service at the beginning. We gave them three different hotel options that we were looking at. And they gave us a risk assessment on the pros and cons of all of them. But really the most important determining factor was that the hotel we stayed at had its own bomb shelter. They had 2 backup generators, and they weren't really anywhere near any kind of government or military building. And so those 3 things made it a good choice.
How can you hear me? How did you meet the soldier that was home and the couple and the guy getting the soldier was the guy getting the haircut, but how did you find them?
Yeah, so there are 3 different Ukrainian journalists that we work with on a regular basis, and you'll hear them contributing reports to our show. But more often than not, they're working behind the scenes as producers. And so, you know, a lot of the time we're working with them to develop contacts and sources to help us connect with people. But there's also, it's kind of amazing how social media has made it possible to connect with individuals around different stories and finding individuals who are willing to tell their stories and who maybe are willing to speak English. There's a social media service called Telegram that is used widely, especially in Ukraine. And there are huge Telegram groups, and it's amazing the information that you can gather there and the individual people that you can connect with. And, you know, and like all social media, it's got its huge problems, but Telegram is a pretty incredible resource for finding individuals.
What forms of transportation did you use?
Yeah, getting to Ukraine is not easy right now. The airspace is completely closed to any commercial or regular traffic. And so I'm based in Boston. And so we flew Boston, Munich, Warsaw. And in Warsaw, we got on a 19-hour train that goes from Warsaw straight to Kyiv. And so that was our route in. And then on our way out, we took a 10-hour train from Kyiv to Lviv in Western Ukraine, stayed there for a day, and then took a final train across the border into Przemyśl, Poland, and then took a 3-hour car ride from there to Krakow and flew home from Krakow. So really, like, no matter how you cut it, if you want to get from the East Coast to Kyiv, it's going to take you 2 days. Yeah, it's not easy.
Hi, Patty.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
I do.
Hi, I'm Nadia. I'm Vera Scope's sister.
Oh, great.
We're both Ukrainians. Vera, especially, as Marilyn knows, as the war effort is almost a 24-hour job. But Patty, I just want to congratulate you as a Ukrainian American. I am just so proud of Americans, of someone like you who really doesn't have any Ukrainian blood in them, but to do what you're doing and report in such an intelligent way, I'm almost in tears. I'm just very proud of you, and I'm proud of Americans and the support that Ukrainians have been receiving. Without that, I don't know where we would be. So congratulations, and just keep on doing what you're doing. As I said, I'm almost moved to tears.
You know, it's really interesting. thank you for saying that. We're kind of like constantly hearing that from people we spoke with all over Ukraine. Was just sort of this, spontaneous, like, thank you for everything Americans are doing. Thank you for everything Americans are doing. And for me, that always was like a slightly awkward thing to hear for two reasons. One is because, I'm a journalist. I'm not there to advocate for the United States position or anyone else's position. I'm just there to try to understand the reality of the situation as people are living through it. And so, it's not my job to say America needs to send fighter jets. It's my job to report on whether or not America will send fighter jets. So that was always a little bit awkward to be thanked, but I completely understand the impulse, because there's just a massive amount of appreciation and gratitude among Ukrainians for the material and the significant military support that the United States has given. I will say the other reason it was slightly awkward for me is that I've traveled extensively in a lot of places, and it's not often that Americans are loved so much. And it just struck me as like, wow, like Ukrainians really love us. They really love us.
Patty, my name is Melanie Seelig. What are these people? How are these people accessing the normal things of every day? Paper towels, food, toilet paper. Do they still have access to all that kind of stuff?
In the areas I went to, yes. Yeah. And again, because I was in, pretty safe areas that have either were not occupied or have, it's been months and months and months since they were occupied. And so a lot of services have returned to normal, supply chains have returned to normal in those areas. I want to stress how it is just a totally different story when you get closer to the front line. That's not where I was, and so I can't speak to that firsthand, but I just want to stress that my experience by design was in a safe area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Patty, would you comment on the time where the air raid siren went off and you had to eat breakfast? Yes, in the shelter. Also, would you comment on what you had said about Biden's visit and the buzz that was going on?
Yeah.
Prior?
Yeah. So I said how much like people in Kyiv just do not pay attention to the air raid sirens anymore. And so in the hotel that we stayed in, there was the normal hotel restaurant on the first floor. And we were there, long enough, and they knew us, and our reporter had stayed there previously. So their wait staff knew us, their front desk staff knew us, and this air raid siren went off in the morning, and we were debating amongst ourselves, like, do we need to pay attention to this or not? And usually what we would do is go to one of those Telegram channels and look for additional information that had come out that would help us sort of figure out, like, this is a threat that is affecting Kyiv, or it's fine, we can ignore it. And so we were debating that, and we were asking one of the journalists that we work with in Kyiv, like, what do you think? And he was messaging us like, yeah, you should probably go to the shelter for this one. And we were like, okay, well, we were just about to order breakfast, but I guess we'll go down to the shelter. And so the waiter in the restaurant was like, I'll bring the breakfast downstairs, don't worry about it. And we were like, okay, everyone else is staying in the restaurant. The staff is going to keep working in the kitchen, and the waiters are going to keep working in the restaurant, and the front desk staff is staying at the front desk. And we're going down to the basement, and no one else is in the basement. And we're like, this is so farcical. Like, he's literally going to come downstairs to the bomb shelter to bring us like eggs and cappuccino. And like, we feel really dumb that we're down here. Like, what are we doing? And then at the same time, we were like, okay, yeah, but also we'd also feel really dumb if the neighborhood gets bombed and we just didn't feel like going 10 feet downstairs. And so instead we got injured in the restaurant. It was just kind of this like absurdity of the situation that was like, well, I guess, yeah. So we ate our breakfast in the shelter. And like an hour later, the siren went off saying it's all clear, everyone can go about their business. But it was like that kind of like really almost like farcical thing would happen on a pretty regular basis. And it's definitely like gives rise to like a whole lot of humor among Ukrainians about like how ridiculous some of these trade-offs are. The President Biden was in Kyiv while we were there. And that was really interesting because he had been scheduled to go to Poland, and there had been a lot of, you know, kind of, oh, maybe, you know, Poland's so close, he could just come to Ukraine too. And his staff had been like, no, that's not going to happen. That's not happening at all. Released his public schedule very clearly did not have him going anywhere else, blah, blah, blah. And then he was there on a Monday. On Sunday afternoon, there is, in the middle of downtown Kyiv, in like the historic center of Kyiv, there are several absolutely gorgeous, historic, ancient churches, like just beautiful, beautiful buildings, like golden domes, like just absolutely majestic. And they're kind of configured around the center of the city where there's like, you know, key government buildings are nearby. And right in the center of it is this really high-end hotel. And that hotel has this bank of windows that looks out over this historic square. And CNN has basically permanently booked all of those hotel rooms so they can use it for their live shots. So they can just put their people like in the hotel room with like this, you know, landscape view of Kyiv behind them. And it's, you know, and a ton of other media stay in that hotel. It was one of the hotels we were thinking of staying in and decided not to. And on Sunday afternoon, the hotel sent like a printed message to every guest in the hotel. And it was really, really peculiar. And it was like, dear guest, we're so sorry for the disruption, but tomorrow from midnight to 11 p.m., the street in front of the hotel is going to be blocked off. And it's like a major important street. It's, I mean, it goes like right through the heart of like this historic center. It goes from the hotel to the foreign ministry building to this key church. You know, it's like blocking off that street is kind of like a wackadoodle thing to do. It was like the road's going to be blocked off all day tomorrow. And from, I think it was like from 9 a.m. until 2 p.m., there's going to be prohibitive security checks or like additional security checks in and out of the building. And from 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., all Wi-Fi, internet, and cell phone signals will be jammed. So sorry for the inconvenience. Have a nice day. And so like all these reporters are staying at this hotel and they all got this message and they were like, what's happening? And so like the whole press corps all over Kyiv was like absolutely certain and on fire, like, yes, the president's coming, this is absolutely what's going to happen. And everyone officially is denying it. No, it's not happening, it's not happening. And so on Monday morning, the public experience of like how the public found out that Biden was actually there was that like three things happened very, very quickly. The first thing that happened is an air raid siren went off. And this was like, I'm trying to remember about what time this was, but it was like mid-morning. There's an air raid siren that went off. And when I looked at the app, you know, the app is set to like the region that you're specifically in, but then you can look at the map and it'll show you what other regions are getting the alert also. And I was watching the app on my phone and every region of the country just started lighting up all at once. And it's like, okay, this siren is affecting the entire country. Like the entire country right now is under an air raid alert. And then we went to the Telegram channels and we were like, what is going on? Like what would cause that to happen? And the Telegram channel said that there were MiG fighter jets that took off from Belarus with like the capability of carrying supersonic missiles. And we were like, okay, well that would do it. Like, because they don't know where in the country those jets are going to head for. So that's what's happening there. And then just a few minutes after that, the first images of Biden in downtown Kyiv started showing up. online also. And so it was just like, bam, 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 like one thing after another. And it was like, it's like air raid alert, big jets are in the air, and Biden's in downtown Kyiv. Okay. Right now. So I will tell you, the response from Ukrainians was just absolutely, they were ecstatic. They were over the moon. They were so grateful. They were so proud. They were calling it like their own kind of victory, that they were able to provide and prove the security apparatus to be able to safely have him there. That they felt like that was, a feather in their cap. The difference that the American military support has made in this war is undeniable. It is absolutely what has made the difference between Ukraine winning and losing. There's no question about that. I think that the questions are, how much longer and how much more. But it is absolutely Ukraine's victory. It is their, it's their defiance, it's their will. Like, it's really, really impressive, the fight that they have put together, but it is absolutely American weapons that have made it possible.
Patty, this is probably a good time this is Randa.
Hi, Randa.
I assume you did not see Alicia.
I did not. We exchanged emails, but we missed each other.
Okay. Alicia is my Russian granddaughter. Many of you know my story of having a Russian granddaughter. She's working in Kyiv for the American Embassy. She'll be there for a year. And I have talked to her while she has been downstairs in the bomb shelter, and New Year's Eve being one of those times. So she also went back and forth on the train and so forth, of course. But she said she was 5 foot away from Biden when he was there.
That's so cool.
That was exciting.
It's the perk of having an embassy job.
Yes.
Hi, this is Vera. Fabulous, fabulous report. So I have 2 questions. First of all, where can we hear your, do you have podcasts, or where can we find the rest, what you've reported on?
Yeah, so definitely listen to KPBS in the afternoons. You can hear us every day.
Okay.
The bulk of our reporting actually aired on February 24th. That was our last day in the country, and really all the work we had been doing up until that point was to air in a special broadcast that we did that day. And so if you go to our website, theworld.org, or subscribe to our podcast, look for the reporting that we aired on February 24th. But you'll also see that we have just really a huge amount of reporting that we've been doing before then, since then, both in this reporting trip, on other reporting trips, just in our daily news coverage. This is definitely a story that we are committed to, and you'll get a regular update on Ukraine if you listen to the show on a regular basis.
And as a follow-up, are you returning?
I would love to. I mean, I would have been happy to stay longer. I mentioned at the beginning, like my job is actually to be a generalist. I oversee the entire show. So the Ukraine war it's one story, and there's a bazillion other stories that we have to remain focused on. So unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of getting to stay focused on this one. So other reporters will be going back and forth regularly, but probably not me again anytime soon. I'm happy to stay on if folks have a few more questions, but it is already 7 o'clock. So if we're tapped out.
But just a quick question. What percentage of the country would you guess speak Russian?
Oh, it's a great question. I wouldn't want to put a percentage on it, but I will say there's a massive amount of things to say about language in Ukraine. And for the folks who are in this call who know Ukraine well, I'd be interested in hearing your comments on this. I speak Russian. I don't speak Ukrainian. I did try to learn some key phrases and words. What I observed is that people were gracious in speaking Russian with me. Like almost, I would say most Ukrainians also speak Russian. Some Ukrainians only speak Ukrainian. Most speak both Russian and Ukrainian. There are also some Ukrainians who only speak Russian. So you kind of have all three variations. But I mean, one thing this invasion has done, or the escalation of this war has done, it has really pushed people in the direction of speaking Ukrainian, you know, really kind of identifying with Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian language, especially in opposition to Russian or as separate from Russian. And for some people, it is very intense and personal and political. And for other people, it's like, whatever, like whatever language works, it's fine. We met a couple who was getting married, and they're from Zaporizhia, and she's Russian and he's Ukrainian. And they said at home, he speaks Ukrainian and she speaks Russian, and they understand each other fine. I will say that because I'm American, people never took offense that I was talking to them in Russian. Like, I always made an effort to apologize. I made an effort to see if they'd prefer to speak English. But they were always happy to just go ahead and speak Russian to me if it made it easier to, like, you know, exchange whatever information we were trying to exchange. And I think that is because I'm American, because they love Americans, and because I am not Russian, it was easy for them to, like, not be bothered by that. But they are distinct languages. The alphabet is slightly different. The language is different. And, you know, I think for people who are natively fluent in Russian, they can really understand a lot of Ukrainian and back and forth. But for me, understanding Ukrainian is quite difficult.
Patty, this is Dan Tierney, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing this presentation to us. It was really eye-opening and interesting, and what a wonderful opportunity you had to go over there.
Thank you.
So thank you for doing the presentation today.
Thank you. You're so welcome.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much for giving us your time, Patty. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'll just say in closing, on behalf of journalists everywhere, there are a lot of journalists who put themselves in harm's way to report the news. And I'm so grateful that you care enough about the news to, you know, spend an hour of your afternoon learning even more about it. And, you know, again, I just want to emphasize, I did not feel that I was in an unsafe situation, but there are many journalists who are willingly putting themselves in unsafe situations to report the stories of civilians who have no choice but to be in unsafe situations. And so I have a huge amount of respect for my colleagues who are doing that work, and for helping all of us kind of keep our focus on people who are really being torn apart by this war. There are a lot of civilians who just do not have a way out, and they are stuck in frontline cities for as long as this lasts. So I appreciate you caring enough about the news to hang out with me for an hour.
Thank you so much from AUW. It was amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
And Marilyn, it'll take a while to transcribe this, you know, it takes about an hour. So it'll be a while before you get your link to send to everybody.
Right. So you'll send the link to me, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'll send it to you and Randa too, because I think some other people wanted it.
Okay. I know that it's great. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Patty.
Jane. Thank you, Marilyn, for having Patty.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.